Okay, everyone. I've been after Brandon for a while. My friend Brandon Brock. Uh, I call him Triple Doctor because he's doctor, and apparently there's a third doctor in there too. You got accepted to a PhD program recently, right?
Yes, I did. A glutton for more punishment.
At Duke?
No, this is in another place. I got one doctorate degree at Duke. I'm done giving them all of my money. I'm gonna go someplace a little more reasonable.
Yeah, no kidding. But you keep going there. I keep seeing
I
you. Like,
know it. I
what
know
do
it. I
you
know it. I know it.
do?
It's fine.
So, you started out doctor in chiropractic.
Yes, I did.
Next one is doctor in
Nursing practice.
nursing practice, and you have this functional medicine approach too. I mean, that's what's
Yeah, I have development nutrition and also, functional neurology. And the reason I'm going back to Duke right now for an orthopedic specialization underneath the nurse practitioner doctorate. So you just kind of go back, and there's only a couple of hundred of us, and which is pretty cool because you really learn a lot about orthopedics.
that's
And the
amazing.
PhD stuff will probably be over cardiovascular disease.
Phenomenal. So how did I meet Brandon, and what are we going to talk about today? Well, let's talk to you about how I met him. So interestingly enough, we both happened to be in Australia last year at the same conference, a symposium, medical symposium in Sydney. And it was a fantastic group of speakers. You and I believe it was probably one of the best conferences we'd ever been to, the
It was
most
great.
well-run, amazing. So beyond that, this is Bioceuticals Clinical Symposium. So we all fly a long way from the United States. And I think Dale Bradenson spoke before me. And then, but before I was going to speak, Brandon Brock was going to speak. And
Who's that guy?
Yeah, who's that guy? Actually, I didn't know who you were because the director of medical education there said, "Do you know Brandon Brock?" I'm like, "No, but I guess I better meet Brandon Brock." So I knew this hurricane was coming in. So about 10 minutes before Brandon was going to speak, I was asked to speak because Brandon's plane was late. Arriving in Sydney. I said, okay, no problem. So I get up and I speak, and then 10 minutes before Brandon's going to speak, Brandon walks up. I'm like, who on earth would fly 18 hours from Dallas and just walk into a symposium and speak? This guy actually has to be exhausted. So Brandon, you walk up, this spiffy, like energetic. Thanks so very much, Amanda, for stepping in. I was late, and you get right up on the stage and you start speaking. And I'm like, I listen to a lot of people, like half an hour into it, I'm like, I have no clue what he just said.
Neither did
I was writing down words I hadn't read before. Like, this guy is a dynamo. And from that moment on, we just been friends. And on the back channel in this world of medicine and nutrition and where you practice, where I practice, we're flipping research back and forth every day. And you're the person I go to say, Brandon, can you help me understand this? Because this does not make sense to me. So we flip a lot of research back and forth.
Yeah. The world needs to know that most of the research I get is probably from you.
Oh, but then you post it. It's like, but I sent you that.
Yeah. I should start giving you credit, man. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's fine. So what we're going to talk about today, we're really going to pick your brain, Brandon, because, we are in the middle right now of this COVID-19 pandemic. So, of course, we're all talking behind the scenes and wondering and questioning. And the other night you were on your own channel, if you will, live. It's called Brain Chat. It's amazing. Like 7,500 people from all over just kind of dig into some amazing topics in neurology and nutrition. So you were talking about how, what's the word I'm looking for? Just how divisive and insidious this virus is. Something you were looking at the R naught and the R factor. So I want you to talk about that. Then I want to get in and ask you to talk about the cytokine storm, like the condensed version. Sure. And the reason I want to jump in there is because we're going into the immune system and nutrition, because as you were talking, and over these days, I'm like, but why aren't we using nutrition in a block and tackle approach? And you said something really critical in that Brain Chat conversation. What you said was, what we should be doing is mitigating the steps. And this is what I was thinking, mitigating the steps that might prevent a cytokine storm. It's not always possible, right? So we have to be realistic. But I'm like, now he's talking my language here, because that's how I've learned that there's ways that we can block and tackle. if we weren't in this situation? I think that's a really important conversation. And then we'll end on just talking on comorbidities and what we can do moving forward. So it's kind of a big chat, man, and it's the end of your day.
It doesn't matter. It's something to chat about. I mean, and this really is a big thing. It's going to get bigger. So I think that we have to be realistic. We have to be responsible practitioners and talk about this stuff, or else, you know, nobody knows much about it. So I'm game, and I'm very, very thankful that you brought me on.
Oh my God, the best. Okay, and he's hard hitting, everyone. He does not mince his words. So get ready. So, like, let's see.
I'll try not to curse any during this one, okay?
So, no, not that. So you really laid out very eloquently this, just how to understand the impact of this virus. So you talked about the R naught, and then you said, you gave us a number 3.5. Can you explain that just so people understand?
Yeah, so R naught is just like, it basically boils down to, I have it, how many people am I going to give it to? How infectious am I?
Exactly.
And really what we're finding is it's very easy to make this term generic across the world, but now we're getting regional information. I mean, the lecture I gave about it maybe on the 18th, I think it's different now, because now we know that it's really, and we don't know why. There's all kinds of theories out there, you know, in one group they eat different, and another group they have their different genetic, anyway, there's a lot of things, but we know that the R naught, in other words, if I have it, how many people are probably going to get it before I realize I have it, is, you know, probably anywhere they're saying the average is 2.83 now, which has come down from
come down
a little bit, but I think that's because a lot of people are really hiding out. Early on, when we weren't testing and we weren't doing anything and we weren't quarantining, it was getting up to around 5.3 or 4. Okay. And so when you look at that, the time of, you know, incubation can be anywhere from 24 hours to up to 20 days is what some of the research shows. And the cruise liner that, where everybody got infected, they got a ton of data from that.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. And
so they use that really as some of the critical data. So the way you calculate the R naught is they look at the serial interval distribution. In other words, they're looking at one person, it turns into how many other people, and then exponentially how it moves. And they can look at different populations and they can just see how it spreads. And so just to kind of compare it, everybody wants to compare it to flu.
Right.
It's probably 2 to 3 times more virulent than flu. Flu's R naught is about 1.3 to 1.4. SARS, which was, you know, back in 2009, I think, it was 2.5. MERS is very, very bad, and it's, you know, around 3.5. It had a low amount of infection, but a pretty high fatality rate. So now there's something called a case fatality, and I think this is the most important thing that people are watching right now. So the case fatality is how many people are going to pass away that get it.
Right.
And remember that all of this data at some point in time is fiction, because we don't know who's reporting what. Some countries,
true.
I think some countries are not reporting hardly anything.
And they won't. The more it spreads to countries that, you know, economically devastated to start with, we're not going to see that data.
So this case fatality is the denominator, how many people test positive. And the numerator is how many people have passed away. And then you just divide and get a percentage. And right now, globally, I believe as of maybe 3 or 4 o'clock, we're at 5.2 case fatality. In the United States, we're at 2.4. But that's because we are doing more testing. And one of the reasons why we have all of these we're outrageously have greater and greater numbers of positive, you know, we're growing, is because we're actually doing way more tests.
And I think it was the same in Italy. Once they kind of got up to par, that's what we were seeing.
Yeah, so your case fatality, ours is going down. So at first we had a really low denominator. And so our case fatality looked really high. And, you know, everybody was, you know, going, oh my gosh, we're going to die. We're going to die. We're going to die. And so that was causing hysteria. Now what's causing hysteria is the denominator is growing, the case fatality is going down, and now everybody's going to say, oh my gosh, I'm going to be positive. I'm going to be positive. So this is why I just kind of quit listening to some of the TV stuff, because We don't know if the denominator is actually true. We don't know if the actual numerator is true, because people are coming in with symptoms of COVID-19, and some of the doctors are like, we already know this is what it is. We don't even have to run a test. And they're treating them for, acute respiratory distress and stuff like that. And so, it's really interesting if they pass away on their death certificate, what are they saying if they don't test positive for COVID because they never ran it? Or they just dying of respiratory, illnesses. So right. I don't know if the total death count, we're all questioning, is everything really accurate? And we just have to say this, there's probably, a confidence interval, or there's probably some sort of distribution of error in there. But, hey, look, it's bad enough to where we need to quarantine. And I'm looking out the window right now at the highway, and there's cars all over the place.
Yeah. It's not even funny, right? It's just, okay, so people are going about their business.
Pretty much. I mean, well, right now they're saying, people that are essential workers, or, they're kind of a critical worker. And that's pretty much everybody right now where I'm at. I mean, right,
exactly, which is why you're at work.
The liquor store is definitely, you look at everything, and it's.
You mean everything's essential in Dallas?
Everything's essential, man. There's no elective stuff. It's all essential.
Oh boy, we could go down that hole. So what is interesting to me then, I want to kind of jump over to this whole cytokine storm so we can understand what happens, because you had such a brilliant explanation of it. But one of the things that's quite interesting right now is we're hearing from medical doctors, and we now have data, or researchers, is many people who get put on a ventilator will never come off it in this scenario. So it's, my goodness, to your point, we should be working way upstream so we don't end up in this situation where pretty much everyone is walking to hospital at that stage where they need a ventilator. And you talked about that the other night, because being able to get them off, I used to work on a vent unit, is unbelievably hard for the individual, right? On their entire system. It's an incredible endeavor to get somebody off a ventilator.
Yeah, many people are staying on them for 10, 14, 20 days.
20 days, yeah.
I mean, it's, and so my biggest thing, everybody's always asking me about, nutrition or supplements or even drugs, So my thing is this, look, we're not using, and I'm not just saying this as a disclaimer, just like I said last time, we're not using nutrition to really treat, prevent, or do any of that stuff. What we're trying to do is to just, hey, look, is there anything I can do that will make your body and its genetic, code and all the factors and comorbidities, is there anything you can do that can just make you function at your optimum, so that maybe you won't get, or you'll be less prone for some of this stuff, and maybe you are more, and I just like the word resilient. Resilient,
yeah, that's a big word. Is true. So let's talk about when the resilience is gone, because we missed all the signposts in the road. And you had such a great explanation, like in 101, cytokine storm 101, that results in ARDS, or this acute respiratory distress. Let's talk about what happens there and what causes it, like the gateway.
Yeah, these viruses, they come in, they get, mucous membranes. And that's why they want to cover the nose and the face and stuff like that. And you guys know this. This is just basic, phase 1 viral infection. So in the world of, natural kind of things, there's a lot of people that have, supplements and even food that they think, they say are antiviral, and then they probably are, okay? But we can't say that they treat viruses, because anyway, so there's about 70 different antiviral drugs, but this virus will get down into your lungs. It'll go down into the alveolar sacs, and it starts to attach to, there's 2 different types of cells, okay, that line these little sacs. They look like little punching bags, and just pretend like there's 2 cells. So there's type 1 and type 2. And the little spike protein, S protein, hooks on the type 2. And it's, ACE, angiotensin converting enzyme receptor. And it's dealing with a renin angiotensin aldosterone system, which deals with your blood, supply, or your actual vessel diameter. So anyway, it creeps through there and then goes into a cell, and then it really uses its RNA, and it goes through a ribosome, and then it starts making proteins, and then proteases bring it all together. And during that time period, you're starting to eject more virus into the bloodstream and then back into the alveolar sac. Now, you're destroying potentially those type 2 cells while this is going on. Okay, so now that's a problem, obviously, because now the control of blood is starting to change. So you're getting closer to vascular dysregulation. All right. So this whole party starts in the alveoli. And type 2 cells also do something very critical. They make something called surfactant. And many babies are born premature. They don't have surfactant, so their lungs, don't inflate. So when you stop making surfactant, the punching bag starts to kind of go like this. Now, also at the same time, that vasculature that is getting dinged, it's starting to do this, and plasma or extravate is coming out and going around the alveolar sac, and it's squeezing it. The surfactant is getting diluted because you're starting to create almost like a plasma soup in there, because there's lots of inflammatory, cells, phagocytic cells, which I'll go over in a second. They're coming in, and it dilutes it. So now it starts to collapse. You're not making surfactant, and the different types of phagocytic cells, which are the neutrophils, the macrophages, and dendritic cells, they're all coming in, and they're like, they see a fight in the respiratory system as a big deal, because if you can't breathe, you're going to die in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes, right? So they know we got to get in there quick, and they get in there, and when they start fighting, they are releasing tons of cytokines that says this: come join the battle.
It basically, they've called in Delta Force, or the Navy SEALs. Delta
Force, yes. And by the way, you want that to an extent.
To extent, right.
But remember now, as this is going on, you're going from a dry cough to now a productive cough.
Interesting, right.
And you're coughing that out. And a study just came out from MIT that shows that those aerosolized or respiratory droplets are going up to 27 feet.
Bingo. So it's like a horn, like a bullhorn.
If you see somebody sneezing or coughing, it's not the 6-foot rule anymore. It's get away. I mean, breathing is one thing, but when they're coughing or sneezing, you really gotta just get out of the vicinity, as far as I'm concerned. So these cytokines are going all out. They're going everywhere. And meanwhile, these cytokines are destroying, not only are type 2 cells getting destroyed, but now type 1 cells are getting destroyed, and they deal with gas exchange.
Right.
So now these alveolar air sacs, which are supposed to come apart and then have elasticity, they're failing, and the type 1 cells are not working. And so a ventilator has to become something that's imperative to deal with respiratory pressures that are appropriate. Okay.
Basically, they're forcing, like a squeeze, like a bellows. Basically, it's what it's sort of acting as, right?
So when they're going through, they're killing type 1 cells, and these cytokines are getting in the bloodstream, and then people are going into septic, infectious shock.
Yeah, that's
so now you have to look at it and say, did you already have a predisposed kidney pathology or liver pathology or cardiovascular pathology? Because think about it. As your blood pressure starts to drop, your heart has to go and go and go.
Bingo.
Up. And if you have heart disease, it won't keep up. So,
well, not only that, because a heart disease, one of the, sort of precursors is endothelial dysfunction, right? So if you don't have sort of an intact vasculature, that's going to undermine the heart. So now you've got the two together. Three.
And the one last thing is that the people that are recovering from this, there's the battlefield is not left beautiful. Okay.
No, I can only imagine.
TGF beta, reactive oxygen species, all these things are going on. And so if you do defeat it, you're leaving more than likely some fibrosis in those alveolar sacs, and they're not as elastic. So you may only have about 80% of your pulmonary function back.
I was wondering about that. It's almost like cystic fibrosis. I don't know if it's a little bit different.
Similar.
Quite similar. Okay. So you end up with that stiffness in your lung.
And there really is literature on certain nutrients that will reduce the different types of, immunological factors that create that.
Exactly.
And I really think that's important, because a lot of people, it's like, okay, good, they're breathing on their own, get out the door, but they're never the same again. They can't go on a jog. They're super fatigued. And, I would really like to see the medical community embrace something that would maybe possibly reduce some of that fibrotic scarring and keep that elasticity once you beat things up. And by the way, the nutrients that do that also stop the reactive oxygen species or help it as an antioxidant.
And they are?
Well, I mean, look, I mean, everybody knows that, you use mucomist, you inhale N-acetylcysteine for like cystic fibrosis. And, so if you inhale glutathione or N-acetylcysteine, these are things that are commonly inhaled with respiratory illnesses. It would be interesting to see if that was something that would maybe help people recover if they're in the recovery phase.
Oh, good idea.
If they would keep their tidal volume and their pulmonary function, if it would be better than somebody or a group that has not had it. Now, that would be a really interesting study down the road.
Yeah, no kidding. So for those of you who wonder what that was, N-acetylcysteine is used, so at least in a supplement form, it's a precursor to glutathione production. So the body can produce its own glutathione. It's pretty rigorous biochemistry, but we all have the ability to do it. We were born with it. Some of us do it better than others. But N-acetylcysteine is often used when you see poor detoxification or biotransformation, but also poor mitigation of reactive oxygen species. So that's where that's coming from. But you need selenium to work with glutathione, right? To regenerate glutathione. And you need vitamin B2. So it's never by itself.
Never. And you need cordyceps works really well too with the recycling of glutathione. So I love what you just said, but a lot of people are like, hey, look, I'm just going to take this glutathione. And what you said is there's little things that you can take. And what a lot of doctors are really figuring out is, okay, I can give this drug with this nutrient, and they're starting to find out that maybe, just possibly, it's more, and I'm not going to say efficacious because we don't know that because we don't have really much.
Don't know yet.
But maybe it's more beneficial.
Totally. Absolutely. We're way down here in biochemistry now. That's great. So where were we? We basically talked about, like, you end up with stricture in the lungs, and basically we got to the heart, right? So now we have, if you came in with heart disease, you already may have a weakened heart. We'll keep it really simple, right? So now what? So then you can't redistribute the blood. Oxygen.
Well, you can. I mean, the heart's like this. It's like asking somebody that's completely out of shape to run a 5K marathon.
Hence the tachycardia. Okay.
Yeah. And hence the heart failure. And believe me, we'll get to comorbidities in a minute, but it's twice as lethal as all the other comorbidities. Even respiratory, it's more of a predictor of death than if you have pre-existing respiratory illness.
Interesting. Because, okay.
It's got to be the thing that if you're starting to spill those cytokines over and the ventilator's working to try to keep you alive and you're, nothing's stopping. By the way, that's how a lot of these medications are working, like the hydroxy, chloroquines and things like that. They're stopping that translocation. They're stopping the cells going back in, and they're reducing the cytokine barrages. They're really immunosuppressants, and that's what they're used for.
Okay. Which is, nothing's great about this, right? But so you have an immunosuppressant, so then you're kind of wide open.
That's
right?
What people taking it prophylactically right now, and I'm like, wait a minute, why are you doing this? There's a possibility that you could make yourself more prone for other conditions.
Absolutely.
And I think there's a time and a place for drugs and maybe even nutrition. I think that some of the TH1 stimulators, like the things that are supposed to make your immune system amazing, I don't know that I want to give that during the phase where you're going from a dry cough to a wet cough, because if I increase that neutrophilic activity or that macrophagic activity, maybe I am increasing the barrage. I mean, so there's a lot of people are debating elderberry right now.
Yeah, you were talking about that the other night.
It's almost like at gunpoint, but there is some literature that shows that elderberry will increase the exact cytokines that go up with this condition up 40-fold, anywhere from 2 to 40-fold.
Okay.
Now, if that's the case, it may be great in one situation, but it may be really bad in another situation. And I think cytokine storms are antigen produced. But if you've got wind going in a cell, why do I want to increase the wind that's already in it?
Plus, all of this, as I'm listening to you, all of this is done in the vacuum of not knowing somebody's unique genome.
Correct.
Right?
About that. That is huge. That's huge, and that's your baby right there.
It is. I know. I was interviewing Dr. Mary Lowdy the other day. We got to the immune system and said, so Amanda, step right in. I'm like, no, wait a minute, not right now. But, you know, I don't think when you're working in the ICU, right, you know, this is not the time to talk about genetics, but upstream, you know, in our well population, it absolutely is, because people who don't have a break on the immune system, IL-10, that we can activate through butyrate, through specific foods, are going to have more potential immune compromised status than other people. So knowing that, we're going to spend a lot more time amping up the SIG-A or the surfactant, or, you know, spending more time working the gut so we can prevent a breach of the gut from other things you might be eating or doing. So yeah.
I think that this is going to become a field, and let me explain what I mean by that. This outbreak or this pandemic is teaching a lesson to the world, and that lesson is this: that this is possible. And
what is
most
happening
of
is
us have not
possible.
lived through a pandemic, and we haven't lived in places where there were outbreaks of different conditions. So in all reality, everybody, once this is kind of, you know, dropped down, everybody's going to be interested in what can I do to make myself healthier, so that this, if it does it again,
I'm in a better place.
it doesn't get me, or it has a
Correct.
lower, maybe possibly a lower probability of dinging me. And I think there's nobody can debate that a healthy lifestyle makes you a healthier person.
Correct. And no, absolutely. And I'm going to be so interested in the data, you know, once we can stand down from this 1, 2, 3 years from now. I was having that conversation this morning. It will be so interesting to see what we know. We know there's, if you're male, potentially have a higher susceptibility than female, but okay, but what were the comorbidities? You know, did they have, you know, autoimmune disease anyway? We know some of the comorbidities, but we have to tease out the data. And you know what? A part of that's not going to be genetics.
Yeah.
Because we're too soon in the field.
Is it going to be hormonal? I mean, really look at this. Like, if you are a 50-year-old obese male with, you know, a little bit of heart disease and early onset diabetes, you could potentially be in extremely big trouble. And everybody thinks that this is in the 80 or 70 plus category. It's not.
No, that's the big one.
This virus, if it gets in there and it will take advantage of whatever it can. And, you know, cells are already toxic anyway in certain situations. So the toxins released from the cells are going to perpetuate the viral infection.
And, you know, I think too, and I'm thinking about, we're seeing, you know, young people are susceptible too. So that kind of goes back to, you are not invincible. No. And that what is going on with the guts of our younger people, because we know right now, we know even with quote, well people who are not impacted by this pandemic right now, that what's presenting right away is dysbiosis. Well, of course, you know, everything's in disarray, but if you come in with an autoimmune dysfunction, I think there's a lot of autoimmune disease. There's a lot of people walking around with that. And it's called, hey, you know what? I have constipation, diarrhea, occasional headache, but actually you have dysbiosis. So maybe that's what we're seeing with these younger people who are deemed invincible. What do you think?
Yeah. Because I think that what we need to look at those outliers, like the 18-year-old healthy person.
Uh-oh.
The interesting thing is there's some autopsy reports that we're now getting back from places like Italy. And what we're finding out is that when they look at these autopsy reports, they're finding that the brainstem is completely messed up, because these viruses actually infect the medullary areas, and that screws with respiration as well.
Right.
They're finding that the lungs are decimated with, you know, bloody streaks and alveolar destruction. They're finding the superior vena cava may be destroyed, and different arterial networks that are coming into the heart, or they look terrible. And then they're finding things like gut mucosa that looks atrophied and it doesn't look well. Now, how much of this was there before and after?
That's my question. We don't know.
Yeah. And so I think what we need to do is there needs to be a certain amount of autopsies done and see what is common and what did that person have maybe in their medical history. And I mean, the research is going to be, believe me, abundant.
Oh yeah.
But it's also, it has to be done in a way to where you're comparing an apple to an apple, and there's not so many confounders around it that what you're really looking at has really no meaning. That's going to be tough.
It is, and it's going to come hard and fast, and it's going to be a while before we can even find a common denominator. So it's going to be really interesting. So one of the things you talked about the other night, which it was really great because you switched over to nutrition. I mean, this was an amazing talk, which I'm going to, hopefully I can share it out, or I'll just tell people to go to Brain Chat because you really unpacked it. But towards the end of the chat, you were talking about the mucosa. You were talking about the gut mucosa and Sig-A. And can you jump into that? Because it was, I mean, I was just listening like, oh, thank you, Brandon. But it was just really important. It was an important conversation.
Well, I mean, Sig-A is like it's the fence that, cover. It's like you've got that slimy layer where, most of your your flora lives. And then you've got Sig-A, which is kind of like a defense mechanism from your cellular structures where you have the gaps between and things can seep through. So it's really a layered type thing. And then right underneath it, there's different we would almost call them lymph nodes, but they're different patches, right, where there's about 80% of your immune system lives there. And so there's a lot of interesting things that happen in that without getting into it. But we know that when you break down mucosal immunity, that you're much more susceptible for pathogens. And that's anything that, from the lips down all the way to the bottom and everything else. So we try to keep those things as healthy as we can, because they're what we call our barrier systems, our nose, our blood-brain, our lung, and we have a lung barrier system. And I'm convinced that if that breaks down and your blood-brain barrier breaks down, that's when the brain gets infected. And I think that really that's a terrible combination.
Yeah, it is. So how do we shore up that surfactant? How do we shore that up?
Well, with guts, I mean, look, I think people need to know what they should and shouldn't eat. I mean, they need to know what foods they're intolerant to, not just giving them anaphylaxis, but probably gives them a little bit of inflammation and they're intolerant to. I mean, I think that's a big deal. I think that people need to have the appropriate, microbiome, and, taking probiotics is probably something, to a greater extent that is immune modulating.
It is.
We know it modulates cytokines. It's pretty much not debatable at this point. There's tons of literature that says it is. And, and if you have gut health that's not, it's not good, you need to find a practitioner. And it's not always, gastric or, colon cancer. You need to have the right amount of stomach acid. You need to have good, gastric transient time. You need to make sure that you don't have intestinal overgrowth. You need to make sure that your flora is consistent. You need to make sure that your zonulins and your occludens are all the little gates, that keep those cells together, are not broken apart and things are going through, and that your immunoglobulin A is great. And that's what we want. We don't want fecal fat going out. We don't want malabsorption. We don't want our Sig-A to go away, because then all of those cells
everything's wide open.
Yeah, and they're just letting things in that shouldn't be there. And the immune system goes crazy over it. And so that can predispose you for all kinds of immunological dysfunction. And any of these diseases, including this one we're talking about right now, we want an immune system that's going to react appropriately.
Correct. And we can modulate so much from the lumen of the gut. That's what's amazing to me. And that's why I know you were talking about SIBO, we didn't say it, but I love the fact that you talked about food intolerances, because they are rampant. And they're not obvious for a lot of people. They become obvious when you live with migraines, right? You live with what you think is normal and you find out, no, you're not normal. Then they come and see you, Brandon, and say, hey, guess what?
No more dairy for you.
You are not presenting normally. At least you are up here, but your body isn't. Yeah. But you're absolutely right. But, one of the things that just it's sad, you modulate the immune system so much from the gut. So one things we look at is a short chain fatty acids. Where do we get them from? We get them from fermented and cultured foods, providing you can tolerate them. And the reason you wouldn't tolerate them is probably because you never ate them, right?
I think fermented foods are obviously, I don't know. They are not eaten enough. Society doesn't embrace them very well. I've learned to embrace them a little bit. And there's certain foods that I'll eat that I know are fermented that work really well, because short chain fatty acids, look, they're going to drive up your immune system and help, but they're also going to reduce your chances of, colon cancer by a significant, large intestine, pathology significantly, probably give you a better chance of coming out on the good side of that equation. But
exactly. I mean, not everyone can tolerate them. We say it's a chicken or the egg. Is it you can't tolerate them? There's a genetic component, right? But there's also, hey, you never ate them. So that maybe, and yet our forefathers did. I mean, it was just every ancient society moving forward has eaten fermented and cultured foods because it's a way of putting up the harvest. But what we get from fermented and cultured foods are these short chain fatty acids. And when you look at what they do, it's almost like they're talking across the gut wall to the immune system, turning things on and off. And one of the major kind of, what you call it, a gene or a protein, I guess we'll call it, that they turn off is NF-kappa B.
Yep.
NF-kappa B, when you turn that sucker on, watch out.
Yeah, IL-6 is next, and then you're inflamed. Then there's an alarm response. But interestingly enough, you said something that's really interesting. We don't have to have a leaky gut per se, right? We know that the dendritic cells, and these are not dendrites like in your brain, but they're a phagocytic cell type. They'll reach up through those little junctions and up, and they'll sample things.
That's so true. Yes, I just learned this, like a periscope,
They'll bring it back down, and they'll go over to a lymph node, and they'll just say, "Hey, check this out." And you got a naive T cell sitting there, and they'll start talking to each other. And if you're dysregulated, or if your body is in a state of you're just sick. Okay. These naive T cells can just kind of say, you know what, I don't like it. Let's go. And then it jumps out and it turns into a phagocytic cell, or it turns into a B cell. And it starts making antibodies against everything. And it can get haywired, and then you can get molecular mimicry. So one food looks like one of your organs, and now you have autoimmune disease. I mean, this can get really, and this is pure science, right? I mean, you see every immunology book. So this can really get out of control. What does this have to do with COVID? It has to do with this. We don't want people getting infected that have a bunch of these things going on at the same time.
Exactly.
So I don't know.
No, it's true. So we were talking about like short chain fatty acid butyrate, and I love that. I forgot about the periscope. What do you call that thing on a submarine that comes up? Is it a periscope that looks like?
I think it's a periscope.
Yeah, we forgot. We need to go back to our James Bond movies. Like, what was that? A periscope. It is. It's amazing how that works. But, other things that modulate the immune system too. And right at the end of our chat, I'm just going to give people a few papers to take a look at. Are flavonoids or bioactives we find in foods. And this is the field of nutrigenomics, is where I work. It's, what is it? What did these bioactives do? And they have the same ability to talk to the immune system and downregulate these different parts of the immune system, like luteolin that you find in parsley, or apigenin in celery. It's like, no wonder the people in the Mediterranean live a long time. They have no clue what's talking to their immune system, but they're eating it.
Yep. Yeah, and you're right about that. I mean, 100%. And in fact, most of the literature that can be sort of utilized in this equation of a coronavirus is on flavonoids.
Yes.
So
exactly.
if you want to look at something that's evidence based when it comes to nutrition or dietary stuff, these are the things that are really kind of some of these other things are not researched out at all, but flavonoids actually have some pretty decent literature that you can say, hey, look, this is something that needs to be done, and it makes sense. Because when you got that fight going on inside the alveolar air sac, and you got all these reactive oxygen species going on, and you got these cytokines going out, these foods or these nutrients are coming down, and they're stopping the oxidative stress. They're controlling that cytokine blast to an extent. And maybe after the bar fight is over, you don't have every table flipped over and every chair broken.
No, that's a really good point. It's a great analogy. But, oh my gosh, there was something you said about that. So here's the question, and it's probably been a long time you've worked in the ICU. I don't know. Maybe you're on call right now, but, when we're working in ventilator units, there's all hands on deck. You have a huge clinical team. And so some of my dietitian colleagues are there, and they're like, oh my gosh, it is tough when you can't help modulate a patient. It's very difficult. So I said, what's in the tube feedings? Because a lot of, you have to sustain patients one way or another. It takes an enormous effort, right, to breathe. So, you know, I said, wasn't you, if you start reading it off, and honestly,
It's
the
scary.
same, it's the same stuff we were feeding maybe 20 years, or maybe it's I'm probably speaking out of turn, but what came to me was, is there any bioactives in there? You know, what are we doing to mitigate oxidative stress?
Well, or what are we doing to cause it? In other words, what
Yeah.
kind of proteins are there? Are they the highly inflammatory kinds of proteins? Or are they the lower inflammatory? Is there lots of sugar in there? Maybe we need some glycolytic activity in this situation because you're going so quickly. But are these sugars that are, maybe going to burn and be a little healthier and not promote some other inflammatory responses? I mean, so I really think that in the future, the nutritionists and the dietitians, everybody needs to sit down and they need to say, okay, look, what are we going to do to sustain life? But what are we going to do to improve function while we're doing that, rather than just saying, we just got to get something in them.
So no, that's very true. Yeah, sometimes when you're working on the cutting edge, trying to keep people alive, that's the last thing you're thinking of. And then you're like, well, I'm out of tools, and that's what's happening. And so one of the questions is, what is there, probiotic in there? What strains are we looking at there? One person I talked to, there were 2 strains. I'm like, was L planetarium in there? You know, do we have strains in there that are doing some modulating?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would agree with you 100%. And by the way, again, there's so much literature out there. A lot of people say there's no literature on that. Yeah, there is.
Oh, yes, there is.
The people that say there's no literature are the ones that are not reading any literature. Typically, that's what I see. And so, there's a lot of papers on PubMed, man. It's very easy to go and just do the advanced search and you can find stuff in 5 seconds. But medicine has to catch up. And you're right. Whenever you're inside an ICU and you're trying to keep their pulse ox up above, 76 or 80, and they're dropping like a, rock, the last thing you're thinking about is their selenium.
Absolutely. Yeah. We have to be realistic here.
Yeah.
But backing it out to when we're all walking around and have our routine practices again, and mine does continue in spite of all of this, we have to ask different questions about nutrition. And I think that's really being opened up by genetics, nutrigenetics, nutrigenomics. And I know you're a huge fan of, what point does every patient I see have their genetics? And you've done a lot of work in that area, because it just can so fast track you to what's wrong.
And by the way, in the future, or even right now, let's say that we get more and more and more infections. So you call the hospital and they say, okay, they ask you all these questions and they're like, okay, stay home. You're not sick enough.
Right.
And then you call your family doctor and you're like, look, man, I think I've got, this problem. What do I do? They're like, stay home.
Stay home.
You're not sick enough. We can't even take. So now you got these people that are sitting at home and they're teetering on falling over here and becoming so ill they got to go to the hospital, or maybe beating it. Why in the world would you deprive them of nutrition or nutrients that could potentially help them? And I'm not saying save them, I'm not saying cure them, but why in the world would I really think there's a gigantic gap that needs to be filled that keeps those people from becoming extremely ill and making them healthier and recover faster.
Totally. And right. And that's kind of what you were saying the other night. And it's what I call like the block and tackle approach. There are things we can do right now. And obviously people are not feeling that well. So maybe you have to put it in a smoothie or juice or something. But there are things right now we know in food that can block and tackle. Like you were talking about sulforaphane. I mean, for goodness sake, this is like a premium, naturally produced molecule or compound found in crucifers. And if you don't like kale or broccoli, go for the bok choy. But for somebody, make a smoothie or a juice and shove that in there, right? With some Brazil nuts, if you tolerate them. And bam, what we're doing is we're writing, as I say, we're translating nutritional biochemistry to the plate. But we're using molecules in food that we know exactly how they work in the body.
Yeah. I mean, that's why they say a healthy diet makes a healthier person. I mean, and there's a lot of questions about, well, what's a healthy diet? Well, it does matter on a lot of factors. What's your insulin like? What's your blood sugar like? How do you deal with oxalates? How do you deal with histamines? What are you allergic to? There's a lot of things. I mean, there is no one diet, and I think this. And that's why when we look at people, when in regards to diet and lifestyle, we kind of try to customize it for them. And it's not always about weight loss. Sometimes it's about inflammatory control, histamine
Totally.
control, and things getting out of whack. And so I think if we had a society that had a little bit, but I mean, we live in a society that's a little bit more difficult. There are modified things, there are hybridized things, there are chemicals, and that's non-debatable. So our immune system is constantly going, what is this? Even it might be a healthy food.
Right.
So, but it still is not quite as clean as the body would like for it to be. So it creates a little bit of disarray, but it's definitely better than some of the junk food. Right now, the best thing is that the gluten-free stuff, because I have to deal with that. The gluten-free part that's all there. Everything else is gone in the grocery store, but the gluten-free stuff is sitting right there. So you just pick out everything you want.
Interesting. So what are people with celiac doing right now? Wait, well, you already know how to live with it, right? Because you wouldn't even go there anyway. But
all 10 of us have, are shopping, from different places. So it's just interesting to be able to see
what's on the shelf.
Interestingly enough, just a kind of a funny story. Well, this isn't really funny, but I mean, we had an 18-wheeler right here on the highway that flipped over and crashed.
Oh no!
It was full of toilet paper.
Was there a run? Did cars stopping everywhere?
So people were jumping out, grabbing stuff, and the big joke was that the truck wiped out.
Oh, so, great!
But it really happened. It was just a true story, and so anyway, it's just. You can't even make this stuff up. But hopefully this stuff will get better. The curve will flatten quickly, not real long, because right now, and the final thing that I'll say about the disease itself is there's a lot of doctors that, you think that military people had PTS. What about the doctors that have seen 500 people die?
It's my thought too. And I want to come back to that, but absolutely.
What about the family member? What about the people that had it? I mean, if anybody, the psychologists and counselors at the end of this should be busier than anybody.
I think they're already saying that. But here's the thing, and you know this from genetics too, because it's a question I've been asking. You have a number of people, many people who live with anxiety and depression, and we've just amped it because now we're going to put them in isolation or in four walls. It's like being in a cage, right, for some people. But you're right with PTSD, and I know it's a lot of your work. However, when you look nutrition, you look at genetics, I mean, I can spot it. Well, that sounds a little silly, but we can see the nutritional imbalances or biochemical imbalances that will predispose someone to being, once you get the psychological part out, but the biochemical inefficiencies, you can see where some people absolutely go off the rails. And it's got nothing to do with being exposed to something like some of our, clinical staff are right now. But for some of them, there's going to be a subsection that is absolutely amped. And unless they work with you, Brandon, they ain't coming back. It is destructive, traumatizing.
It's going to be a bad. I mean, imagine getting, walking into the hospital, your family can't go, and you're saying bye, and because they don't want, they won't let them in, and you're sitting there thinking this could be it. I mean, it's just one of those things where I think people are underestimating that right now. But we needed to learn. We learned something from war. Yes. Everybody keeps saying this is a silent war. Well, it doesn't. There's no guns going off. There's ventilators going off, and there's all these alarms going off around people. It's the same kind of thing.
It is.
When you see death and you experience stress, and I'm not trying to marginalize anybody that's a soldier, and I'm not trying to, make this a bigger deal for doctors and clinicians and nurses. However, right now there's a different kind of warrior, and those are the people that are fighting for health. And
thank you. Yes,
they are just as prone for post-traumatic or an adverse event. And those that don't have the genes or the background or the upbringing to have resilience will end up suffering significantly after.
It's such a profound thing. It's such an obvious thing you just said, which kind of comes sort of to the end of what I want to talk with you about. You talked about warriors and people are going to predispose because of where they're working on the front edge, or they don't have the wherewithal. And, it does come back to really supporting maybe public health initiatives, outreach initiatives, so many different levels. I mean, the fact we've had such an underfunded system to even put the basics PPEs there is mind blowing to me. That's an economic question, I guess, but.
Well, and that's the other thing is, the economic fallout of this. I mean, if you read some of the economic figures on this, just closing every school down is probably going to cost this, globe is probably going to cost about as much as rebuilding the whole infrastructure of that system.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
And that's, I mean, when you look at it, there's really no amount of money. I mean, you can put $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there. It doesn't replace the fact that a senior missed his senior year. It doesn't replace the fact that kids that don't have computers or the internet are trying to figure out right now how to get their math homework done. I mean,
correct. Yeah, it's exposed a huge chasm, I guess, of inefficiencies. But you know what, Brandon, maybe it also makes us put pause and say, wait, we haven't thought about this. We as a society, as human beings, there's some of the things I do like that are posted on social media right now. Is like, hey, maybe somebody greater than us pushed a pause button and said, hey, people, here's your warning. We can do. Here's your warning. You're assuming that everyone has technology. You're assuming it's just you push stop one day and kids, they'll be fine. People would just stop working for 4 months, and maybe there's a greater message.
Not all the way down to when you go and you buy baby wipes or toilet paper. Listen, imagine this, and this is, I won't go on about this, but just think about that first time you actually get to go back out and eat at a restaurant.
I know.
And have one of your favorite meals. It's going to taste different to you. It's going to be a different experience. And I think that people will have more gratitude. And I think that as a society, we have just become so mundane. It's just, okay, come home, sleep, go to work, and it becomes very flat. And I think right now we're starting to see that there's more to life and more things to appreciate than we could have ever imagined. And so that is the beauty and the silver lining and the terribleness of this.
No, I absolutely agree with you. And I'm starting to see people, come to that. And there's just some very nice things that people have posted about, hey, there isn't a lot great, but maybe like you can hear the birds sing again, or maybe families actually have time together. It's not a great background, but I do agree with you. So. Yeah.
I've enjoyed my time with my family. I mean, we do. And really, I'm just like this, kind of try to put the cell phones away. There's lots, listen, and I'm not going to get into the conspiracy theories, but maybe I do want electronic stuff away from me for a while. Okay. I mean, I don't know. Put it away. Let's just go play a game. So we've been just playing good old fashioned card games and stuff like that. And, I'm teaching my kids how to do all
genes.
I'm teaching my kids all the good things like poker.
Yeah. Poker. Dad, what's this game? So, but I think one final thing that I keep hearing, and I know it's music to your ears, it definitely is to mine, is this has finally blown up the need for telemedicine. The military's been doing this for years. We've been operating across the world, with an expert at Walter Reed or whatever, helping somebody in Bosnia back in the day or wherever we're deployed to now. But the fact that now we may finally let down some borders so doctors can work with doctors or see patients like you can see patients wherever you want to, I think is really important. Amen. As I say, I can work with the doctors I want to work with. Done.
I did it all day today. And I can tell you, like, if you just need a medication refill and you live 45 miles away, maybe I can just talk to you and say, hey, look, how you doing? I'm doing great. I'm not having any problems. And then I can order some labs. You can go to the nearest draw station. I can pull it, see how it's going. If they need to be modified, we can do it. There are some things that I really think telemedicine can do to make it cheaper for the patient, more convenient. They can be at work, and it's more convenient for you. And it's, I don't know. Right now it's an interesting experience. You're seeing the good and the bad of it. There's definitely bad, but there's also definitely good. And this is another thing that as we come out of this, the whole world's going to be different.
Yeah. And we talked about it.
And so I don't know. I hope that we get to be able to give more telemedicine, and I hope that we also get to realize that people need to stay healthy.
Stay home and stay healthy for a while.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
hey, listen, everyone. I want to give you a couple of papers because Brandon's right on board with nutrition. upstream nutrition. So we talked about cytokines. So one is called flavonoids as cytokine modulators. Write that one down. A possible therapy for inflammation-related diseases. And I already sent that to Brandon, so if you go on Brain Chat, you'll find it there probably. The other one I think is really insightful is called regulation of immune function by polyphenols. So these are peer-reviewed papers, and I have a few more. Oh yeah, the primer, because we're so hung up on vitamins A and D, vitamin effects on the immune system. Vitamins A and D take center stage. But I say they take center stage right alongside these other more kind of robust immune modulators, which are your flavonoids, which are polyphenols, people. They're just a subclass, right? So, all right, Brandon, I grabbed you for an hour.
I can hang out with you all day.
We have. It's fun. But I tell you, when Brandon steps in the room, it's like, woo, what? Hold on to your seats, because he's going to download, and you will never write faster in your life. Brandon, thank you so much. You're amazing.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Beautiful times.